You are entering a world filled with darkness you rue, a shadowy void where nightmares come true. A world full of horror, of evil and sins. Between castles and monsters is where hell begins. Where we celebrate the sinister, so push through the thicket. And welcome, dear traveler, to my world of the wicked.
Happy Christmas in July, everyone! I'll be honest, I was going to save this video for later in the year, but then I discovered I had 1 week, and only 1 week, abandoned without an upload. So I decided to bump this a little bit backward and take care of it ahead of time for a Christmas in July themed piece. I've discussed Halloween-friendly themes on this channel before, and shall do so again, but today I want to spotlight a very specific breed of villainy: Christmas villains. The antagonists of many holiday films and stories tend to feel somewhat underrated in my opinion. Some of them are among the greatest villains in fictional history, but because they're usually only relevant for seasonal occasions, they don't tend to get as much credit as some other baddies out there. Today I aim to fix that by spotlighting some of the nastiest ne'er-do-wells to ever haunt the holiday season. I originally considered doing a top 12 for this countdown, because 12 days of Christmas, har har, but I decided to stick with a simple top 10, mostly because after 10 it gets really hard to rank a lot of these characters for me. These villains will not be ranked based on how threatening or how scary they are, nor on how famous or despised they are. This is simply and purely a matter of my personal opinions and feelings. Some will be from traditional tales, others will be more unconventional. Some are one-and-done doers of devious deeds, while others have been reinvented in many ways for numerous winter times. On that note, because I know this might be brought up, I will not be including interpretations of the mythological Krampus on this list. The primary reason for this is because I'm thinking I might do a video on this fabled monster in the future, and I'd like to save my thoughts for when, and if, I give them the spotlight. With all that said, let's see how many different ways one can spoil the season of sweetness. From curmudgeons to crooks, these are my top 10 Christmas villains. Number 10. Jack Frost, from Frosty's Winter Wonderland. So here's a bit of personal trivia for you all. When I was a very small boy, around 4 years old, I became so obsessed with this character that I actually spent a big part of the year dressing up like him and acting as if I was Jack Frost. I have no idea what made me so specifically in love with Rankin Bass's interpretation of this mythical figure, but if that's not enough reason to give him placement in my top 10, I don't know what else will make a difference. Rankin Bass, of course, are the creators of many of the most famous animated Christmas classics of all time, and their villains alone can make up a plentiful list without much help. And while others like Burgermeister Meisterburger or the Bumble might be more popular, none of them captured my imagination as a youth, the way Jack Frost did. And none of them have had quite the character evolution either. The closest I can think of are the Miser brothers from The Year Without a Santa Claus, and I don't really consider them villains so much as neutral forces who cause trouble. In his first appearance in Frosty's Winter Wonderland, however, Jack most definitely is a villain at the start, and in my opinion he's an upgrade to the original Frosty the Snowman's antagonist, Professor Hinkle. That character was sort of a comical Dick Dastardly type. He was more of a nuisance than a real threat for most of the story. Unlike Hinkle, Jack has a lot of real power, and that's what makes him dangerous. This immortal winter spirit becomes jealous of all the attention Frosty gets. In his mind, the children should be giving him all the love and affection because winter wouldn't even exist if it weren't for him. He thus decides to try and steal Frosty's hat to eliminate the competition. Jack really isn't evil so much as he is lonely. What he wants more than anything is a friend. But, perhaps because of his fantastical status, it's hard for him to get along with others. Even after he's redeemed and becomes a friend of Frosty, Jack still causes trouble, as he decides to try and make winter last forever so they can all keep having fun as long as they like. Again, he's thankfully shown the error of his ways, but I love that even when he's trying to be nice, Jack still isn't perfect. Characters who go through redemption arcs but still have their rough edges are always fascinating to me. While Jack Frost didn't have the intense and long-lasting life of Frosty himself, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or even Mickey Rooney's Santa, he did show up in later Rankin Bass specials, even getting a starring lead in one all to himself. And in these appearances, he proved to be a much more friendly character. Still, it can't be denied he was the antagonist in his first appearance, and it's probably in that role that I enjoyed him the most. I should add that I'm aware there have been lots of other versions of Jack Frost, some villainous and some not, but this is by far my favorite take on the character. Maybe someday I'll do a video just about the evolution of this pasty-faced fellow, but that's another story. Number 9. The Gremlins from... well, Gremlins. Christmas horror movies are not as rare as one might think, but it is rare that they make a good impression or effectively enter the zeitgeist of popular culture. Most people, myself included, seem to prefer it when Christmas is treated as the merry time rather than the scary time. There are, however, some dark holiday films that are worthy of interest. Many of the more important creepy Christmas classics were made around the same time period, within the 80s and early 90s. Arguably the greatest of all of them is Gremlins. This horror comedy classic focuses on the mayhem that befalls a part of New York City when the titular little monsters are unleashed upon the world one Christmas time. The movie is filled with both silly and sinister moments, mostly due to the maniacal nature of the gremlins themselves. These vicious little blighters can be hilariously goofy, but also incredibly sadistic and ferociously fiendish. They delight in causing chaos seemingly for its own sake, and if people get hurt, or worse, in the crossfire, that just makes it more fun for them. The leader of the gremlins in the first film is a particularly treacherous little hobgoblin called Stripe, who seems to be a bit smarter than the others. Stripe goes on a quest to spawn as many of his kind as possible in what we can only presume to be a bid to, what else, take over the world. Hey, he needs to celebrate Yuletide somehow. Eventually, Stripe and his horde are defeated by the adorable Mogwai Gizmo and the other main heroes, but this would not be the end of them. Stripe would go on to become one of the most iconic antagonists of the franchise, as the Gremlins would continue to spread their scourge to pretty much all forms of mass media. It all began one snowy Christmas in New York, and for fans of dark comedy, I think it was a perfect Christmas present. Number 8. Ebenezer Scrooge, from A Christmas Carol. Now, Scrooge's appearance on this list is pretty much inevitable. A Christmas Carol is one of the single most popular Christmas stories ever told, and has been adapted and reinvented more times than any other Charles Dickens classic I'm aware of. Scrooge himself, in turn, has become just as iconic to the Christmas season as Rudolph or Frosty. He's sort of become a reverse Santa Claus, an eternal symbol of grouchiness to contrast the jolly joy of the season. However, what probably is surprising to a lot of you is seeing Scrooge take such a low spot, especially if you know me well. It's well known that A Christmas Carol is one of my favorite stories of all time, in the same ranks as Alice in Wonderland or Dracula. The thing is, in my opinion, Ebenezer Scrooge isn't really a villain. Or at least, he isn't a villain for most of the story. The entire point of A Christmas Carol is that it's meant to be a tale of redemption and forgiveness. Scrooge starts off as a nasty piece of work, there's no denying that, but the whole purpose of the tale that unfolds is showing not only why he's become so awful as a human being, but also showing how even someone as mean and miserly as Ebenezer can turn over a new leaf and become a better person. Other villains of the season do redeem themselves, of course. We've already seen Jack Frost, and others still to come change their ways at some point. But they still spend most of the story as dastardly trouble causers. Scrooge does not. Even when he is at his most evil in the original book, he's not nearly as bad as most of the other villains on this list. He's not a nice person, but he's also not a criminal or a monster. He's a human being who has become jaded and distant due to hard experiences. The story is all about him learning to open up and find the light again. As a result, as much as I love the story and the character, it feels wrong to really call him a full and proper villain at the end of the day. But at the same time, I think most people, myself included, would consider it sacrilege not to give him some placement on this countdown. So, yeah, Scrooge makes it into the top 10 through his own stubborn iconography. But I can't in good conscience rate him too highly. Don't worry, I have a feeling most of the villains to come will more than make up for that fact. Number 7. Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life. While Scrooge's level of villainy is up to debate, Mr. Potter's most certainly is not. Played by the legendary Sir Lionel Barrymore, who actually played Scrooge a few times, Henry F. Potter is one of 2 or 3 characters on this list you could probably see as sort of a nightmare version of Scrooge. What Scrooge would be like if he had absolutely no redeeming values or never learned his lesson at the end of the story. And out of all those options, I would personally say he's the single most despicable. I was actually strongly tempted to place the antagonist from It's a Wonderful Life much, much higher in the countdown, top 3 in fact, but I decided against it after taking into consideration one simple fact. This is meant to be a list of favorites, which in my opinion means you have to actually like the characters on some level or another. There are plenty of villains out there, of course, who people tend to say they love to hate. Characters who are reprehensible, but who we genuinely enjoy watching and maybe even empathize with. However, there are villains out there who are intentionally designed to be purely and simply loathsome. We don't love these characters at all. We simply despise their guts. A friend of mine has referred to them as punchable villains, and I think that's a great way of putting it. These are the antagonists who are just so repugnant, all we want to do is give them a good sock in the face. Mr. Potter is one of these examples. The smug cruelty of this malicious codger just makes me want to knock him out of his infernal wheelchair and beat him repeatedly with a giant candy cane. Potter is willing to cheat, steal, and backstab just about anybody to get what he wants in the real world, and doesn't really care about the misery he causes. When we see how the world would be if our protagonist, George Bailey, had never been born, we see Potter's evil go straight up into supervillain territory, with him conquering the entire city and even naming it after himself. Ironically, despite the strong urge to see him get some comeuppance, perhaps the biggest upset is that Potter doesn't face any known consequences in the film itself. Apparently, there was a scene set for the movie where Potter dies of a heart attack and sees visions of hell preparing to consume him. But it was cut because the filmmakers felt it spoiled the otherwise inspirational, joyful atmosphere of the picture's conclusion. On the one hand, I do completely agree. But on the other hand, the desire to see Potter suffer is so very intense. Overall, he's a fine antagonist. He serves his role well. He's undeniably one of the best Christmas villains ever put to the silver screen. But there is a difference, as I believe I've said before, between favorite and best. And if we're talking about actual favoritism, how much I actually like the character, I don't think I can place him as highly as I might have in the past. I genuinely enjoy all the other characters behind and ahead of him a little more. It's the iconic status of this movie that ultimately wins him his placement. Number 6. Marv and Harry from Home Alone. Talking of villains you love to hate, I think one could argue Marv and Harry, the original bungling burglars of the Home Alone series, are among the chiefest examples of such characters out there. Played by Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci respectively, Marv Merchants and Harry Lime are a couple of scummy thieves who act as the arch-nemeses of the first major protagonist of the franchise, Kevin McAllister, played by Macaulay Culkin. In the first film, the comical crooks make up a team referred to as the Wet Bandits. Their modus operandi is that they target houses while the homeowners are away. Harry loots the place, while Marv turns on all the taps, flooding the house as a means of leaving a calling card. When the McAllister family heads out on Christmas vacation, they decide to make their home the next on their hit list, but fail to count on the ingenuity of the young Kevin, who booby-traps the house in zany, cartoonish fashion, leading to all sorts of slapstick shenanigans. Though the duo are sent to jail at the end of the film, they would return in the sequel Lost in New York after escaping prison. Coming across a lost Kevin by chance, the two decide it's time to get some payback. Unfortunately, even when in unfamiliar territory, Kevin proves too slippery for them, and manages to outrun and outwit them over and over on a mad chase across the city. While the first 2 movies are generally still enjoyed by people today, it's perhaps telling that the series took a severe downgrade afterwards. without Marv and Harry's inimitable chemistry and kookiness on their side. Whenever anyone thinks of the typical team of bumbling slapstick crooks, I think these two are the characters who first come to mind. Number 5. The Mouse King, from The Nutcracker. If there is one story to compete with A Christmas Carol as quite possibly the most frequently reinvented holiday tale, it's most likely E.T.A. Hoffman's fairy tale, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, usually shortened to simply The Nutcracker. While the most famous interpretation of this fantastical tale is the ballet version, with music composed by Tchaikovsky, the story has been reimagined and adapted numerous times with varying levels of success. In nearly every version, you'll find the original titular villain of the story, the Mouse King, sometimes called the Rat King, presumably because rats in fiction have a generally less savory reputation than mice. In the original tale, this rodent is a monstrous creature with 7 heads. This detail typically doesn't make it into most interpretations, but the basics of the Mouse King story beyond that usually do. The Mouse King is the ruler of a horde of ravenous rodents, and is the one responsible for the good prince being transformed into a living nutcracker. He and his army of voracious vermin work to take over, and presumably devour, all of the land of sweets. However, the king is ultimately beaten in a battle with the nutcracker, typically with the help of the story's main protagonist, a young woman sometimes called Marie, and other times Clara. It is the death of the king that restores the prince to his true self again, and allows the story to ultimately reach a happy conclusion. I love the Nutcracker, especially in its ballet format, and much like Mr. Potter, I was actually tempted to place the Mouse King at least slightly higher. However, in the ballet, his time on stage is usually surprisingly small. Meanwhile, most other versions of the story I've seen are, well, not that great. There are only 2 other takes on the character I personally have particular fondness for that I've seen, namely the one played by Mike McDonald in the 1990 adaptation The Nutcracker Prince, and the one voiced by Tim Curry in Barbie and the Nutcracker, mostly because it's Tim Curry. No matter which version of the story you like most, the original fairy story, the ballet, or any other subsequent adaptations, this pernicious pest is almost guaranteed to show up somewhere at some point. Number 4. Hans Gruber from Die Hard. Once again, we go from a pretty traditional holiday menace to a much more unconventional one. When it comes to the action classic Die Hard, there are basically 2 crowds of people. Those who see it as a Christmas movie, and the ones who are wrong. While Die Hard is by no means a conventional holiday film, I see it as being in the same vein as things like Gremlins or Batman Returns. And while those films focus much more on the themes and visual elements of the season, while still being dark and exciting in equal measure, this one still makes the holiday important to the setting and ideas of the story. As a result, Hans Gruber, the main villain of the movie, played by the late great Alan Rickman, not only gets plenty of credit as one of the greatest action film antagonists, but also one of the most intense Christmastime creeps ever seen in cinemas. Gruber and his gang attack a skyscraper tower, which is the headquarters of a mighty corporation. They claim to be terrorists, but this is in fact a cover for their true objective: simple robbery. They seek to steal millions of dollars in untraceable bonds from the building's vaults. The plan is both simple and complex at the same time, and seems to start off without a hitch. However, Gruber fails to reckon with John McClane, played by Bruce Willis, a witty New York police officer who will stop at nothing to save his wife, Holly, who has been taken hostage along with many others by the felons. This was arguably the role that put Alan Rickman on the map in the popular consciousness, and really established the route his career would take afterwards, playing sardonic and often antagonistic characters with inimitable sneering charm and the occasional snarky comeback. Gruber is a clever and devious antagonist, arguably a little too clever and devious for his own good. While he always seems to have a plan or strategy up his sleeve, McClane still somehow always seems to be a step ahead of him. The whole movie becomes a game of chess between the 2 men, each trying to outwit the other with their respective advantages as McClane steadily makes his way through the tower. Granted, most chess tournaments involve pawns and rooks instead of hundreds of rounds of blasting bullets, but I frankly think that just makes the game more interesting, don't you? Number 3. Barnaby from Babes in Toyland. The original Babes in Toyland is an operetta by Victor Herbert. And that's really all you need to know, because A, I've never seen the original operetta, and B, it really wouldn't matter much if I had. For some baffling reason, while there have been numerous adaptations and reimaginings of this title, none of them have virtually anything to do with the plot of the original show. Not only that, but all of them are quite unique from each other. Not only do elements of the plot change, but even the identities of the main characters and the details of their relationships with each other are different in almost every version. There are, however, a couple of basic constants you can count on, and the most notable of them all is the main antagonist, Barnaby. Much of Babes in Toyland involves characters inspired by Mother Goose rhymes. Barnaby is the crooked man, and lives up to that title with relish. No matter which version of Babes in Toyland you watch, Barnaby is always up to no good. Since every interpretation changes up elements of the plot, his exact goals can differ. Sometimes he's out for money, sometimes just to cause trouble, sometimes neither, sometimes both. No matter the details of his dastardly schemes, he is always depicted as a greedy scoundrel who seems to thoroughly delight in every devilish thing he does. Much like Mr. Potter, Barnaby is essentially a nightmare version of Ebenezer Scrooge, a miserly old crook who has all of Scrooge's nasty qualities, but none of his redeeming features, nor any of his potential subtlety. Every take on Barnaby is pretty much a typical mustache-twirling melodrama menace, and that's honestly what makes him a delight to watch. Everyone who knows has a favorite take on Babes in Toyland, and by extension, their own favorite take on Barnaby. The most popular is probably Ray Bolger, from the 1960s Disney film version. I personally grew up loving the one voiced by Christopher Plummer in the 90s animated rendition. However, my actual personal favorite is the one from the 1930s Laurel and Hardy version, played by Henry Brandon. There are plenty of others out there, and no matter which you prefer most, you can be sure this crooked man hasn't finished walking his crooked mile yet. Number 2. Oogie Boogie, from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Well, if you know me, you know this guy has to be pretty high on the list. The Nightmare Before Christmas, produced and conceived by Tim Burton and directed by Henry Selick, is a strong contender for my favorite movie of all time. So it stands to reason the main villain of the story, the boogeyman himself, Oogie Boogie, would rank pretty highly not only among my favorite Disney villains, but also one of the best when it comes to heinous holiday hijinks. In the original film, Oogie doesn't show up till the last third of the picture, but his presence is built up several times before then. He takes advantage of the plans of his rival, Jack Skellington, who wants to take over Christmas. Oogie has his henchmen, Lock, Shock, and Barrel, carry jolly old Saint Nick to his lair, where he plans to torture, kill, cook, and eat him. Yikes. Thankfully, Jack sees the error of his ways, and arrives in the nick of time to save Santa from the clutches of the gluttonous gambler. This was far from Oogie's last hurrah. Like many great Disney villains, he returned multiple times afterwards, causing trouble for both Halloween and Christmas alike. Perhaps his magnum opus was the video game Oogie's Revenge. There he conjured up an elaborate scheme to take over every single major holiday on the American calendar, and thus become the 7 Holidays King. Oogie was originally voiced in all of his English language appearances by the inimitable Ken Page, who sadly passed away in 2024. Keith David, famous for voicing among other characters fellow Disney villain Dr. Facilier, took over the role for a concert production in 2025. As of now, he seems to be the prospective replacement for Page in future appearances, though I'm not sure if this has been officially stated. Either way, one can only hope that this big bag of incensed insects will continue to menace many a holiday in years still to come. Before we finish with our last Christmastime cretin, here are some honorable mentions. Billy and Billy, from Black Christmas and Silent Night, Deadly Night, respectively. How weird is it that the killers from 2 of the most infamous holiday horror films share the same name? Pitch Black, from Rise of the Guardians. I wasn't sure if this film really counted as a Christmas movie, hence why he doesn't make the list. But hey, Santa is in it, so he makes it here at least. Gustafson, from Jingle Jangle: A Christmas Journey. This musical is only a few years old, and I already feel confident naming this treacherous toy maker as one of the best holiday baddies. The fun of Keegan-Michael Key and his villain song are a big part of why. The Toy Santa, from the Santa Claus 2. I actually like this sequel more than the original, believe it or not, and I think part of it is the lunacy of this very strange villain. Scut Farkus from A Christmas Story. Shock of all shocks, I'm actually not a fan of this film. I know, heresy and blasphemy of the highest order, so sue me. Despite this fact, I can't deny, this character is probably one of the most iconic bullies in the history of cinema. And Max Schreck from Batman Returns. I wasn't sure if I should count Penguin and Catwoman from this movie or not, but as an original nemesis invented for this feature, Max definitely counts. Being my favorite Christopher Walken role is all he really needs to get some attention beyond that. And my number one favorite Christmas villain is the Grinch from How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I mean, what do I even need to say? It's the Grinch. He's yet another one of those highly iconic characters who has become as synonymous with the holidays as Santa himself, who he mockingly emulates. Dr. Seuss's infamous mean green one is another villain some have likened to Scrooge, but once again, he goes above and beyond Ebenezer's nastiness. The Grinch doesn't just complain about Christmas, he decides that he doesn't want it to exist. Eternally frustrated by the noise and good cheer that he can never seem to share in, he tries to actively destroy the holiday by stealing all the goodies he can gather from the Whos of Whoville. He does all this with a smile on his face, showing neither hesitation nor remorse, thoroughly delighting in his dastardly deed. While he does eventually see the light, it's not till the very end of the story. For most of the tale, he is absolutely the bad guy, and loves every second of being so. The Grinch's story and character have been adapted and reimagined multiple times. There's been an animated special, no less than 2 movies, a stage musical, and even spin-offs and sequels that have had the Grinch tackle other Dr. Seuss characters, and other holidays such as Halloween. There was even an official sequel book written not very long ago, where the Grinch briefly backslides from his redemption after being frustrated at a Christmas tree contest. The Grinch has been played by many actors as well, and no matter how good or bad the version, all of them clearly bring a great deal of fun and effort to the part. Some versions give this nasty, wasty skunk a sympathetic backstory to explain his evil ways, while others just sort of make him a grump who goes to extreme lengths to basically quiet those noisy kids on his lawn. No matter the case, I think he's a villain a lot of us can empathize with, which is why he's become so popular. We've all felt the lingering, nagging irritation the madness of the holiday rush can cause, and the urge to strike back in some fashion is more than relatable. Right alongside Scrooge, I would argue the Grinch is the single most iconic Christmas villain of all time, and there's not a single doubt in my mind that he takes the cake as my number 1 spot. Considering the guy's theme song, which never even mentions Christmas, is a staple tune of the holiday, I think it's fair to say his infamous immortality is thoroughly cemented. And thus concludes another entry in World of the Wicked. I hope you'll join me in the realm of darkness once again in the next video. Until then, happy Christmas in July to you all once more. Until next crime.